Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Radner, I wanted to talk to you about allies and partners. It's something that you've raised, all of you have raised in terms of the importance of what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. We've seen in the European theater right now what allies and partners means when it comes to response to Ukraine. And I feel like it's an important moment to take a step back and gauge what allies and partners means in the Indo-Pacific, especially when it comes to a counterweight against the PRC. Dr. Radner, you were just talking about India, for instance. You talked about the Quad. You talked about some of the challenges there when it comes to India's relationship with Russia, but you feel like that's moving in a better direction. I guess I just want to point blank ask you, do you assess that India is the reliable partner that we need? Is there any concerns on your end about the Quad, about India moving forward in terms of their actions when we will need them in the future?
Uh, Congressman, I perceive the U.S.-India defense relationship as one with incredible momentum. We're going to hold our highest, most senior level engagement with them in early April. That's a 2+2 with Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, and their counterparts. And that meeting will discuss a number of activities that not only are unprecedented, but are the kinds of things that would have been unimaginable 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So obviously there are challenges with the relationship with India, but I think they're manageable, and we are moving forward very rapidly in deepening the partnership.
I see those partnerships strengthening our ability to communicate, have that dialogue, do exercises. But I guess what I'd like to just get a sense of from you is what does it mean for the allies and partners under duress? What does it mean to have this tested? So, in the event of some type of conflict with China, I wanted to ask you what specifically are the objectives? What would we want to see come to fruition when it comes to our allies and partners? How do we test and assess what that would look like under those types of strain that we see right now in Europe?
Congressman, it's obviously a very context-dependent question. In the case of India, we have seen a test case of this in the last several years when the Indians were facing aggression from China on the line of actual control, where the United States rapidly provided capabilities and intelligence, and in the context of trying to improve trust in the nature of the defense relationship, that was a defining moment. So this is about them being ready to support our efforts, but also us being ready to support theirs. And these are precisely the kind of conversations that we're having at a political military level with a number of our closest partners.
With the military, well, with the arrangements that we have when it comes to our partnerships in the Pacific, AUKUS, Quad, am I correct that, and I just want to double check on this, that none of these have any military requirements in the case that any of the other members get attacked, something that would be more akin to what we have with NATO, is that correct?
Congressman, neither the Quad nor AUKUS is a mutual defense treaty, but we do have mutual defense treaties bilaterally in the Indo-Pacific that are akin to NATO.
So when we're talking about some of the situations that may occur, the one that we've talked about the most is about Chinese aggression upon Taiwan. I wanted to just ask what your confidence level is that the partners and the allies that we have in the Indo-Pacific, as of now, would step up in the way that we need.
Congressman, again, that varies from partner to partner, but I am confident that some of our closest partners would be with us in a Taiwan contingency.
So in terms of the overall, I guess, trajectory and the health of our partnerships in the region, how would you grade it? Yeah, I'd like to just get a sense of your baseline right now and where we're trying to get towards.
Congressman, strengthening our alliance and partnerships has been an absolute centerpiece of the Biden-Harris administration. And in the Indo-Pacific, I think we've made considerable strides, including building upon some of the progress that was made during the Trump administration. And again, when I look around the region, partner after partner after partner, I see relationships that are stronger than they've ever been and that are on an upward trajectory.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Scott is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Ratner, I want to start with you. I mean, the illegal fishing from China is not limited to the Indo-Pacific. It goes all the way around to AFRICOM. General Townsend had suggested that the illegal fishing in Africa was going to lead to political unrest. Is there illegal fishing? Is that about money, or is that because they need the fish to feed their people?
Congressman, I think it's both an industrial interest as well as protein for their citizens.
Okay. I want to point out to you that, and I hope the Biden administration is paying attention to this, I hope we're all paying attention to this, Ukraine exports 50 million metric tons, 50 million metric tons of corn and wheat. Over a fourth of that goes into the Indo-Pacific region in Asia. And I think that we need to be doing some type of analysis on what the political and economic disruptions look like when that food is no longer hitting the global supply. They would normally be planting their crops right now. I think it's unlikely, obviously, based on what Russia has done, that food supply comes to the global network, for lack of better terminology. And I do think that all of our areas of responsibility need to be looking at what a reduction in food supply means for their particular areas. There are two primary sources of belligerence in this world right now. They are Russia and China. Admiral, at the end of World War II, the Soviet Union claimed that they own the Kuril Islands. Those islands, my understanding is, belong to Japan. This dispute has been going on for 77 years. It's not one that's talked about much, but I do think it's important that as we try to resolve these issues that we, on territories, that we talk about all of them. Can you speak to what the United States can do to assist our Japanese ally again in that territory? Is this sovereign Russian territory, as the Russians claim, or do these islands belong to Japan?
So I'm going to defer that first part to Secretary Ratner, because I believe the U.S. doesn't take a policy or a position on those who owns what, right? What we would like to do is ensure that any of those disputes are taken peacefully and in accordance with international law. But there are multiple disputes, as you highlighted. The Kurils are only one. The Japanese are also worried about the Senkaku Islands to the south. And, you know, there are hundreds of disputes throughout the South China Sea. So the position is to ensure a peaceful resolution of those disputes in accordance with international law. I don't know if Secretary Ratner has anything else.
Well, let me move to another area then. China is responsible for the majority, if not an extremely significant portion of the fentanyl that's coming into the world. Dr. Ratner, what is the Biden administration doing to stop the Chinese and the fentanyl that is coming into the world that seems to be unrestricted by the Chinese government?
Congressman, that's outside the purview of the Defense Department, but I'll be sure to get you an answer on that question from the relevant departments and agencies.
All right. Germany and other countries have been resistant to increasing their defense spending. Japan is one of our allies that spends about 1.3% of its GDP on defense. Are we seeing countries like Japan, based on the recent aggression from Russia and the conduct of China, are we seeing them move to increase their defense spending the way we've seen Germany and others recognize the current threats?
Congressman, we'll see. I know there are current discussions on that ongoing in Tokyo. These are obviously sensitive issues for them, given some of their constitutional issues and otherwise, but clearly they are seized of the mounting threat and challenge from the PRC.
I think as we see increased spending from those that share our interests and our values as Americans, I think we need to make sure that we're coordinating with them so that we get the most for the dollars that are spent. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Khanna is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ratner, could you briefly describe the United States' role in the 1962 border conflict between China and India under President Kennedy?
Congressman, I'll have to get back to you on the precise history on that.
The gist of it is that President Kennedy and the United States supported India in that conflict. And then when there was the border conflict in the June of 2020, when China violated the line of control, could you briefly describe the United States' role at that point?
Yes, Congressman, I wasn't in the seat at the time, but as I recently mentioned, the United States did rapidly provide certain intelligence and capabilities.
Did Russia do anything to protect India when China was violating the line of control, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
And did Russia, to your knowledge, do anything to protect India in 1962 when China violated the line of control?
Congressman, I'd be happy to get back to you on
that. To my knowledge, they didn't. And so both times when there has been a border dispute with India and China, it's the United States actually that has come to India's defense. And so I guess I'm perplexed why, and I say this as an Indian American, why India has abstained 3 times from the Security Council and is unwilling to condemn Putin's unprovoked aggression into Ukraine. Do you have a view on this, and has this been raised at the highest levels with the Indian government?
Congressman, I know we've been engaging with Indian leadership about this issue, and as I mentioned earlier in response to a question, we're aware that India has a long history and complicated economic and security partnership with the Russians. They receive a majority of their weapons from Russia historically, and that's something they've been working hard to wean themselves from. But defer to them to speak on their own exact decision-making on this.
There's 60% of weapons from Russia, but I guess let me ask you this. Do you think the United States or Russia are more likely to come to India's defense if the Chinese were to invade beyond the line of control?
The United States, Congressman.
Has that point been made to India?
Congressman, we are in deep strategic conversations about the future of our partnership with India. Like I said, we have our most senior level dialogue with the Indians next month, in which Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken will have an opportunity to speak with their counterparts about these critical issues.
What is the plan for India to get off the 60% reliance on Russian arms, and how fast can that happen if they wanted to switch to getting weapons from the United States or European allies?
Congressman, again, this is obviously a sovereign decision for the Indians. What we are encouraging them to do is to purchase more American capabilities, as you mentioned, work with other third parties, Europeans and others, and improve their own indigenization of their own defense sector. So those trends together are already underway. If you look over the last several years, the trend lines are moving in the right direction. I don't have an answer for a particular day on the calendar as to when they achieve a certain benchmark.
But putting aside what their own decision-making is, how quickly could it happen if they said, we want to switch as fast as possible? I mean, what would you say is a reasonable rate of reducing Russian dependence? I mean, could we get that number down 10% every year? Or what is a reasonable target if they said they wanted to do it?
Congressman, I'd be happy to get you a more precise answer to that question. I think it depends a lot on the nature of the specific capability, from munitions all the way up to much higher end capabilities.
I appreciate that. I'll just conclude by saying that I think it's obvious that the United States would stand against Chinese aggression on the line of control far more than Russia or Putin would, and that we really need to press India to not be as dependent on Russian defense and to be willing to condemn Putin's aggression in Ukraine, just like we would condemn Chinese aggression beyond the line of control. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dr. Desjardins is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ratner, let's shift our attention to the tension between Chinese and Taiwan. As we know, the world is watching Ukraine and Russia conflict. as we speak. And last October, President Biden made headlines when asked whether the United States would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked. And the president replied in the affirmative and said that we have a commitment to do that. Is this the department's official position on the perspective of the Taiwan-China conflict?
Congressman, the department's position is that the United States policies have not changed in terms of our One China policy, the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances as the foundation of our policy.
Okay. A lot of people seem to have mixed feelings about what exactly the United States should be doing in Ukraine. What's our commitments there? Contrast our response in Ukraine to what it would look like in China. As we know, China has been unpredictable and probably expedited in most of what we predicted about their capabilities and their advancement of their military forces. So with that in mind, if we see an unfortunate escalation in that region, what would Americans expect to see in our response there versus what they see in our response to Ukraine at this point?
Congressman, we could spend all day talking about the differences and similarities between Ukraine and Taiwan, and there are some of both. What I will say is when I look at the conflict in Ukraine, the lessons that I draw, number one, are the importance of Taiwan developing its own capabilities, and that's something, and its own defenses and deterrence, and that's something we're working with them on. The power of the unity of the West and the international community coming together around this kind of aggression is an important signal to potential aggressors in the Pacific, and also some of the economic measures that the United States and others have been willing to take to raise costs on Russia in this instance is also an important lesson.
Okay. Admiral, on that same line, what can we do to learn from, if there were mistakes in Ukraine, what can we learn from that, and how can we better prepare deterrence to China from attacking Taiwan in terms of what do you need for defense, and what can we do better?
Thanks, Congressman. So similar to what Secretary Ratner articulated, right, this is a real wake-up. There was some surprise over in Europe. I think that, number one, we have to look at this and say, hey, this could happen. And I have a sense of urgency to execute the missions the Secretary has assigned, which is to prevent this conflict. But it just goes back to what we talked about before. So there's some posture initiatives. We need to be more forward. We need to be more robust. So the posture positioning and the credible capability forward is the best way today.
Do we need to enhance their defense capabilities now?
Absolutely, sir, in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act, and that is something that we're doing at every opportunity.
Okay. Admiral, let me finish with the disturbing aspects of China's modernization and specifically hypersonics. Going into the NDAA cycle, what do you need and what should we be focusing on in terms of research and development in terms of us fielding both offensive and defensive hypersonic weapons and capabilities?
So the Guam Defense System is the number one priorities, as I've put forward in my unfunded list most recently, Congressman. That's on the defensive side. But to your point, right, in order to deter, there's both a defensive component and an offensive component. So some of our long-range capabilities in the form of hypersonics are also critical to ensure that we have both of those capabilities to deter.
Okay. I just have just a few seconds. I'll just note that my first question, Dr. Ratner, on what would it look like didn't get answered. And I understand it's a complicated question to answer if a conflict did arise in Taiwan, but just to prepare our country for what it will look like, is the defense of Taiwan different than what we're doing for Ukraine?
Yes, Mr. Congressman, I think it would be different.
Okay. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Before I recognize Representative Moulton, a reminder there's a vote on the floor of the House. There's 4,000 people left to vote. It's a motion to adjourn. We'll just continue through the vote per the chair's instructions. Chair recognizes Representative Moulton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Aquilino, do you agree with the Marine Corps' expeditionary basing strategy to maintain pressure on China in the Pacific?
Yes, Congressman, I do. So as a part of deterrence against that competitor, it will take the entire joint force. I credit both the Commandant as well as the Chief of Staff of the Army to adjust their form, so the Marine Littoral Regiment concept to be able to be expeditionary, forward, and provide support from the land component.
Do you think the Navy has adequately resourced it?
The Department of the Navy, I know the Commandant's moving very quickly. There's some capabilities we would like faster.
The Marine Corps disagree. I mean, the Marine Corps feels that you don't have enough amphibious shipping devoted to this. And the reason is because when the Navy does their planning for this, they've used a readiness factor of 80% availability. The Marine Corps looks at historic operational availability, which is more like 63%. I guess it's been about 43%, literally half the planning number that you use in the past year. So I'm not sure how we square the wheel here.
Thanks, Congressman. I'll go back to the CNO and the Commandant and see where they believe they are. The initial setup of the littoral or the Marine Littoral Regiment is self-deployable via C-130 as they work through the
I understand, Admiral. Dr. Ratner, how do you plan to help resolve this disagreement? Because it's pretty fundamental. We don't need to leave Marines stranded on Pacific Islands because we don't have enough shipping.
Yeah, Congressman, it's an important point. I agree with Admiral Aquilino that these are important capabilities. I know they're beginning to stand up the first.
Yes, but my question is, how do you plan to resolve the dispute? It seems like a pretty fundamental disagreement if we don't have enough ships.
I think, Congressman, I'd be happy to get back to you in the context of the FY23 budget and how these capabilities.
Admiral Aquilino, just going back to you, 20 years ago, China had the largest land army in the world. It was a Cold War relic, and in fact, we barely paid it any mind because we weren't concerned about its effectiveness, and we probably took some solace in the fact that China was spending so much money to maintain it. In the last decade and a half, they've radically transformed their military, and rather than making massive investments in a land army, they actually cut it. They're making massive investments in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, drones. If your kids have drones, they were probably invented and manufactured in China. They clearly lead us in a lot of these areas. Do you believe that the Navy is transforming itself quickly enough to meet this rapidly transforming threat?
Thanks, Congressman. Boy, as I articulated before, I have a sense of urgency, and we absolutely need to move faster. I do believe the Navy's been focused on the PRC as the primary challenger, but there's some things that certainly could move faster.
Well, Admiral, I sincerely appreciate that answer because I think there haven't been enough leaders like yourself in the Navy who have acknowledged that you really do need to move more quickly. If the Chinese attack us with an AI-enabled force, an autonomous weapon system of some sort, and we meet that with an American manned alternative, who do you expect to win? I know this is a highly theoretical question, but I'm curious of your view on these
My
matters.
view is the United States.
You are aware that in a recent DARPA simulation, an AI-enabled F-16 beat one of the Air Force's top F-16 pilots 5-0. Now, maybe Navy pilots are that much better, but that's not a good statistic.
Yes, sir, I have heard of that, but I'm unfamiliar with the details of the scenario or as it applied.
Well, I think we all need to be familiar with these details because this is the fight of the future. And if the Chinese beat us because they're more willing to invest in autonomous capabilities, and it proves that the autonomous capabilities are more effective than our manned force, as much as we love our manned force, we're going to be on the losing side of that equation. Dr. Ratner, I'm curious of your view on this situation, this matter.
Yeah, Congressman, I would just note that the department in the FY2 budget made its largest ever investment in research and development and testing and evaluation on these advanced capabilities. Just last month,
What percentage of the budget is that, Dr. Ratner?
I don't know the percentage off the top of my head. I'd be happy to get you that.
It would be interesting to compare it to the percentage that China is investing in these capabilities to understand if we are, in fact, transforming our force quickly enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes Representative Kelly of Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question, and we're dealing with an approach bill today, and we're in March already. Can you guys tell me the true impacts that these continuing CRs that we do every time have had on your ability to maintain readiness, and what equipment do you have or don't have specifically in the last, in this current fiscal year? What deprivations has it caused you?
Thanks, Congressman. So in my statement, I articulated the need for predictable and sustained budgets. Again, with China being a near, mid, and far-term problem, it's even more critical. There's a ton of loss of buying power as it applies to the CRs. Those impacts are well known. From my perspective, though, it also prohibits any new starts. So when I talk about the Guam Defense System, mission partner environment, and our ability to link our ranges, those are 3 top priorities that we're just unable to start on based on that impact.
And General, real quickly.
It's the same, sir. I mean, we've had challenges with some maintenance issues, repair parts, and new starts.
I'm going to keep stomping my foot until some of these people around here listen to me and understand the disastrous consequences it has for our Department of Defense, especially in all of our agencies, but especially Department of Defense. I want to talk a little bit about fleet management, and especially when we're talking about our merchant fleet and the ability to resupply in that region. Having flown and gone to that region, it is a long haul, which makes the logistical chain really, really tough. What things, if you could ask, what do we need in our merchant fleet to get fuel?
Do you think China believes that the United States will defend Taiwan with U.S. forces if they were to use force against Taiwan?
I think I'd take that for a classified conversation.
Okay. So under the Taiwan Relations Act and the War Powers Act, does the president have the authority to intervene with U.S. forces, if this happened today, during an invasion of Taiwan without seeking the authorization of Congress?
I'm going to defer that one as a policy question to Secretary Ratner.
Okay, well, perhaps we can follow up on that because I wanted to get to sort of the last part of this. So this has been a debate that I think has been, elevated recently. So if the United States changed its policy of strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan to a policy of strategic clarity and guaranteed that it would come to the defense of Taiwan to maintain the status quo, would this be a deterrent to China?
I think as this conversation continues, if I were to look at the alternative between strategic ambiguity and strategic clarity, there are some believe that it would be a deterrent, and there are some that will believe it would be an accelerant. I think it's worthwhile of a deep, thoughtful conversation as we look at that option. I think there's pros and cons to both, but we ought to look very closely.
Okay, and then I know you didn't fully answer the earlier question, and this was the part I wanted to get to, is that, if China thinks that the United States will come to the defense of Taiwan, and you described there's sort of 2 camps in the strategic clarity, strategic ambiguity, can you explain, why would it be viewed as a provocative act for us to just be clear, to provide clarity, to say that the United States will come to the defense of Taiwan to maintain the status quo? So can you explain the people who would see it as provocative, that camp and their thought process?
I would say that based on the One China policy and the PRC's articulation of the importance, in the academic world, any movement towards the independence of Taiwan would be viewed very strongly by the PRC.
Okay, well, I just want to reiterate in my last few seconds, I think this is a very important debate. I think it's a debate that we need to be having now because, as I highlighted, the shortness of distance.
Mr. Gallagher is recognized for 5 minutes.
Admiral Aquilino, if the president came to you and said, Long, my top national security concern is preventing a PLA invasion of Taiwan, and I think it's going to happen in the next 5 years, but I'm having trouble understanding how and whether the bureaucracy is executing my top priorities. So I need your help developing some metrics to help me understand if we're making progress, things that I could ask every morning when I get the PDB, whether we are doing X, Y, and Z. What would those top measurable metrics be? What would you recommend the president do in that scenario?
I think, Congressman, thanks. Boy, that's really complex, and we try to do it all the time, right? The assessment of where you sit is really complex, and there's a ton of variables. First, I would articulate, are we postured in the right places with the right credible force to be able to respond quickly and then to dominate in all those domains? So I would kind of do that type of measurement.
But things we can measure. I mean, I'm talking, it doesn't need to be complex. It could be missiles, it could be ships, could be Taiwan's own investments. I mean, what are the most important things the president needs to be tracking to gauge our progress on deterring a PLA invasion of Taiwan?
I think it's the, again, I don't want to make it, well, first of all, it is really complex as I see it, right? I just can't say X missiles compared to Y missiles and we're good, right? It's the capability of those missiles. It's the survivability. It's the ability to get to where they need to go to launch. It's the ability to understand the target sets that you're going after. So that's why I go back to, it would be a comparison of how do I execute compared to the challenge in each domain would give me a decent sense, and we try to do that all the time.
Well, you mentioned your first response was basing or access. Could you talk then a little bit about, I mean, as I look at your AOR, I see a lot of U.S. flag possessions, Midway, Wake, territories, American Samoa, Northern Marianas. How, if we were to invest in hardening these possessions and territories, how would that contribute to your ability to deter a PLA invasion of Taiwan?
Yeah, it would absolutely allow us to both move further forward, right, west of the international date line. I have to be in place with the right capabilities to be effective. Second, it gets to the agile logistics piece that many of the members brought up, right, the ability to sustain forward such a long way from home. And it is one of our asymmetric advantages. We're seeing it play in the Ukraine, right? There's nobody else on the world that can do what we've done. If you look at what happened in the Middle East, it's a critical advantage, and we have to continue to mold it. That posture directly contributes to that.
Well, you see, we started to simplify a complex reality because presumably we in DOD and the president could measure the extent to which we're hardening our existing possessions or getting access agreements where we don't currently have them. And in terms of that latter issue, what is at the top of your priority list in terms of where you need access that we don't currently have?
It's not necessarily where we don't have, it's where we might want to expand. Again, I start with the 5 treaty allies, which are critically important. So Japan, we're in a very good place with Japan, and we have to maintain those places. The Philippines, critically strategic terrain, and we need to expand in the Philippines. We are expanding in Australia, as Secretary Ratner talked about. Thailand, also important. We have logistics support there from our ally. New places, India, we're working towards logistics support in India and additional cooperation that's been articulated. Singapore, we have 3 ships there in a logistics site. So to continue to sustain those and expand is the focus.
And I think another thing we could measure quite easily, actually, is what the Taiwans are buying and investing in. We talked a little bit about asymmetric defense. What do you want, 2 questions. What do you want them to buy? And would a security assistance program similar to what we have in Ukraine, beyond foreign military sales, help you accomplish your mission of defending Taiwan from a PLA invasion?
Yes, sir. At first, I left out Korea before, only because I don't want to step on my buddy General LaCamera's toes, but a critical treaty ally. On the capability piece, I'm truly encouraged, right? So the people of Taiwan bought 100 Harpoon systems. The focus there, we need to get them there quickly. The other capabilities that Secretary Ratner talked about, we need to make sure we have programs and ability. Whatever mechanisms that can be delivered to produce those and deliver them more quickly under the current environment would be helpful.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Kahele is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mahalo, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Ratner, Admiral Aquilino, General LaCamera for appearing here today. I'd like to thank personally Admiral Aquilino for calling me 2 days ago to share the decision by Secretary Austin to defuel and permanently shut down the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility in Hawaii. Admiral Aquilino, real simple, do I have your commitment to work with myself and the Hawaii congressional delegation to ensure that Red Hill is safely defueled within the timeline set forth by Secretary Austin?
Yes, Congressman.
Thank you for that commitment. I'd like to jump now, Admiral Aquilino, to your testimony, specifically developing regional partnerships. You just answered a question from my colleague about sustaining that posture forward. And I understand you were just in Palau earlier this year. As you know, compact negotiations with Palau and our other freely associated states and our allies there have stagnated. These nations are a critical part of U.S. national security policy, and our compacts with them address economic assistance, very important to these nations. Continuing that assistance is not only important as a national security matter in light of the region's competing geopolitical realities, but also as a moral matter in light of our shared history and the continued role that these nations continue to play in our national defense. So, Admiral Aquilino, given Palau's strategic importance to our country, how important is it that these agreements are expeditiously completed before they expire? And secondly, what is the DoD's position on investing in their critical infrastructure, such as the compact road, which has fallen into disrepair?
Thanks, Congressman. As you and I have talked about before, the agreement of the compact of the free association team is really important. I do want to highlight that the lead for that event is the State Department, as supported by Department of the Interior. It's got a DoD representative on it, but it is critical. These are areas that we have deep people-to-people ties, and we are responsible for the defense of those nations. So we need to work through these. They become renegotiation needs to be done in 23. DoD is supporting that event, but it would be critical to get those agreements worked through as soon as possible.
Any thoughts on the investment in critical infrastructure? Is it advisable to improve runways in Palau, in Peleliu, in Anguar, as well as their very, very important deep water seaport for the U.S. Military? Absolutely.
And as a part of the posture improvements and distribution we've talked about, there are many of those that are on our list. Matter of fact, the Marine Corps, along with the Navy Seabees, actually extended one of the runways in Palau based on our own capabilities to start some of that work. So some of it is in MILCON, others we can do with other funds appropriated, and we continue to work to improve those places.
Thank you for that answer. Dr. Ratner, the White House's 2022 Indo-Pacific Strategy document highlights the importance of building connections within and beyond the region through people-to-people exchanges. What are some of the soft power support systems and institutions that can help support this Indo-PACOM national security requirement?
Thank you, Congressman. I would defer to the State Department and other agencies on specific programs, but we are certainly looking to build economic linkages, people-to-people linkages, youth exchanges, and other areas.
You know, in Hawaii, Dr. Ratner, the East-West Center is uniquely postured to expand exactly what you talked about, the people-to-people exchanges that are necessary to build capacity and expertise in the region and its challenges. Do you believe that the DoD can dedicate more resources to these types of professional exchanges, and that within the Pacific Island region that this would be warranted?
Congressman, I'd be happy to get back to you specifically on the resourcing question, but as a matter of policy and strategy, it's certainly in our interest to strengthen and maintain those types of relationships.
All right, thank you. And mahalo, Chair. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And everyone, thank you for your service and dedication. Dr. Ratner, I'm very concerned. As a friend of India, India is the world's largest democracy. America is the oldest democracy. My father served there in the Flying Tigers during World War II, so I developed a great fondness for the people of India, the success of Indian Americans, and so it's become shocking that such a great country has abstained on the issues of the mass murder in Ukraine. And I'm concerned a lot of this is because of foreign military sales and the different technicalities and whatever. What's being done to address issues to make sure, as already been previously brought up by Democrats and Republicans, of their fondness for India, that we're not their main support of military, which is in the interest of the people of India and the people of the Indo-Pacific.
Congressman Wilson, we've had a chance to talk about this a little bit this morning. My response would be that I share your view of the importance of the U.S.-India relationship 100%. And we understand and recognize that they have a long, complicated history and security partnership with the Russians, but that they've been systematically diversifying away from that. And we've been engaging with them on that question, looking for them to purchase more U.S. systems, more European systems, and develop their own indigenous capabilities as well. And I think the trend lines are moving in the right direction.
And it just seems so unnatural. The relationship with Prime Minister Narendra Modi should be with the United States, not in any way associated by way of abstention with a megalomaniac Putin in Putin's war. And I'm just like, again, I saw our colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, appalled that there would be abstention by the great country of India. Additionally, I appreciate the questions from Congressman Gallagher concerning the defense of Taiwan. My father served Flying Tigers in Kunming, Shantou, Xi'an, and had a great affection for the people of China. And out of that, I have such an appreciation. And my concern is for Chinese lives, Taiwanese lives. We've got to build up the defenses. I like the concept of a porcupine, that it would just be not in the interest of the CCP to attack Taiwan. And he was talking about the different levels of equipment, and you did too, and I appreciate that which is being purchased. Should we also look into a Lend-Lease, just as we, America, provided Lend-Lease to stop the Nazi siege of Leningrad, which was successful for the people of Russia that some of them have forgotten, but a Lend-Lease as being proposed for Ukraine to defend Kyiv from Russian or Putin aggression. Should we look for Lend-Lease to expedite to providing military equipment to Taiwan?
Congressman, we are currently in the process of evaluating all tools and authorities possible to expedite the provision of the necessary asymmetric capabilities to the Taiwans, precisely to reinforce the kind of deterrence that you're talking about.
And General LaCamera, I had the extraordinary opportunity due to Congressman Kurt Weldon in 2003. I'm the only person left who had been on that delegation to DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, to Pyongyang. And the comparison of Seoul, if you ever want the greatest comparison between free market capitalism and socialist totalitarianism, obviously, it's the Korean Peninsula. Gosh, the success of South Korea. But I saw the Potemkin village, sadly, the horror of people subject to totalitarianism. And of course, this is a dictatorship that had been set up for the Kim family by Joseph Stalin, and now we're in the third generation. I share the concern of Congressman Turner and others about the artillery capability, particularly against Seoul, and how could this be addressed?
Thanks, Congressman. Part of it will be addressed in close air support and if the fight kicks off and how we would strike against it. But he's not just got the long-range artillery. He's developing other capabilities that give him really a 360 threat to the peninsula right now, which is concerning.
And I share the concern about the great territory of Guam. So please, every way to
Gentleman's
defend.
time has
Thank you.
expired.
I yield back.
Mr. Gallego is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to witnesses for joining us today. My question is for Mr. Ratner, or Dr. Ratner, I should say. In your written remarks, you largely touched on the conventional capabilities that China is developing but I'm increasingly concerned about the threat in the gray zone. If we draw any lessons from the ongoing war in Ukraine, it's that we need to ensure our allies and partners are too prickly for an adversary or competitor to swallow. And we've kind of discussed this about irregular warfare, and I think it's very crucial training. Do you believe the department has the authorities, though, it needs for special operation forces to collaborate with allies and partners in irregular warfare? And where can we further deepen or expand irregular warfare programs with allied partners and forces in the Indo-Pacific?
Congressman, maybe I'll defer to Admiral Aquilino to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing with partners currently in the region.
Yeah, thanks, Congressman. As you know, we do many JSETs. The Special Operations Command is extremely valuable. The SOCPAC commander is in many, many countries working to improve training capability and to support their special operations forces. At this point, I don't believe I need additional authorities.
Okay, so you don't believe you need additional authorities, including, well, just to be more specific, do we have the authority or the capability for us to do joint training with Vietnam, for example?
We do, to do our JSETs exercises and training, absolutely.
Okay. Admiral, you described the seized initiative as the first step in building enduring advantages. I would argue that maintaining a robust defense intelligence posture in the Indo-Pacific region must be one of those priorities. I look forward to leading a CODEL to the region next month to conduct oversight of defense intelligence equities. To the extent that you can share your perspective in this unclassified forum, what do you see as the biggest intelligence gaps in the region? And what steps should we take to deepen intelligence cooperation with allies and partners from Northeast Asia to the freely associated states?
Thanks, Congressman. I hope you'll come through Hawaii on your travel. I look forward to meeting you and hosting you in person. Obviously, as I talked about before, this persistent battle space awareness is enabled by all-domain ISR. And while, from what we've watched over the past 20 years, we never have enough. So any capabilities, whether they be current, terrestrial, undersea, on the sea, above the sea in space, or cyberspace, that delivers that persistent battle space awareness are desirable.
Okay, thank you, Admiral. And then, General, I wanted to ask you about the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. As you know, this effort is designed to strengthen our presence in the region, our infrastructure, and our logistics and maintenance capabilities. It also meant to enhance our exercise and security cooperation. How do you envision United States Forces Korea contributing to this initiative, and what role do you think the Republic of Korea itself can play in the furthering goals of PDI?
Thank you, Congressman. Our contribution, or the PDI for the defense of the Korean Peninsula, for me, is our ability to train with allies and partners. We've talked about Cobra Gold, Balikatan, Talisman Sabre, RIMPAC, and our ability, or my ability, to get Korean forces and U.S. forces integrated as a combined element, working with our allies and partners in the region.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Mr. Waltz is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to submit for the record a letter from the committee noting its concern about the lack of progress in the negotiations with Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Republic of Palau, and the renewal of the compacts of free association, particularly that there has not been a negotiator named yet, and we've had a lot of discussion about how critical that is to you, Admiral Aquilino and Dr. Ratner, but where's the negotiator? This is obviously a joint effort with Commerce and Interior and the Department. So it's a letter to the White House, to the President. I'd like to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Yep. Thank you. General LaCamera, we've had a lot of discussion about allies, and I think we are moving in the right direction. I'm worried we're not moving in the right direction fast enough. The threat briefs in terms of what China is prepared to do and overlaid with our pathway to get there to deter it are off in terms of the timeline. But in the event of a conflict, General, what is the government of South Korea, and understand the votes are being counted, but generally speaking, they've had a common position, is the government of South Korea prepared to allow U.S. forces to operate from South Korean territory in the defense of Taiwan? In your opinion?
I think it would depend on if there was a threat to the Korean Peninsula.
So minus a threat to the Korean Peninsula, a threat to Taiwan, which would probably necessitate, from the Chinese perspective, attacks on Japan. Are we going to be able to use those forces, 30,000 that are there, plus the associated air assets from South Korean territory?
Well, Congressman, my best military advice would be what's the threat to the Korean Peninsula and what can we afford? You know, we still require combat power to secure the peninsula. So I think it would be a discussion with the South Korean government, with Admiral Aquilino, with the Secretary of Defense on what our obligations are on the peninsula and what's needed for the Taiwan fight.
Sounds like a non-answer, General.
To me, it's a hypothetical. I don't know the incoming government.
Are we incorporating into our planning use of those forces, potentially, obviously with the acquiescence of the South Korean government?
Are we? Mm-hmm. I have not been told.
And Admiral Aquilino count on your forces in the case of that fight when we're talking about forces forward?
Admiral Aquilino can count on me to execute my mission of protecting the Korean Peninsula.
Okay.
Congressman, I'd recommend taking this into a classified setting. I think we could give you a more fulsome answer to that question.
Okay, that would be great, and wish we could have talked about that yesterday. However, I do think that we do need to take a public posture and with the new South Korean government on what we're prepared to do and what they're prepared to do. And an associated question there is China going to lean on the North Korean government to ramp up tensions and to tie those forces down in a Taiwan Strait scenario? Dr. Ratner, we talked about harpoons, and currently the harpoons are due to be delivered 2025, I believe. Is that sufficient? I mean, by the time they're delivered and then we have the training and the operational capability, we're looking at 26, 27 to have a full capability. Is that sufficient? And what's the department going to do to accelerate that timeline?
Congressman, I wish they were arriving there yesterday. So I think as soon as we can get them there is better. And I can assure you we are turning over every rock to see how we can accelerate the provision of these capabilities. Okay. And we have dedicated personnel working across the department, across the Security Cooperation Department, and in discussions with partners about how we might be able to do that.
How can this committee help you do that?
I'll get back to you on that, Congressman.
Okay. Taiwanese need harpoons.
Yep.
As you said yesterday, I agree. The Ukrainians needed harpoons. That would have made a big difference in the defense of Odessa and Mariupol right now. We didn't, I don't think, do what we could to get those to them, and we're seeing the ramifications of that. I would hate to be having this conversation in 25 or 26.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Ms. Slotkin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. Sorry that we've been coming in and out with votes. You know, I was in Taiwan over Thanksgiving. You guys have sponsored some really useful classified briefings and tabletop exercises that I've participated in. And it just keeps coming to me clearer and clearer that while we have military options and it is our job to prepare to counter China when and if we ever, God forbid, have a conflict, that we are just not using the other levers of American power, namely economic power, our cultural power, just a whole bunch of other things. And I don't want the Pentagon to feel like they are the lead foot in the debate and the engagement with China. So tell me, when are we going to have a strategy that you all can fit under? Dr. Ratner, help us understand how we're going to leverage the other things, because we're, as you've seen, we're watching things play out with Russia right now in Ukraine. No one wants to see Taiwan be the next Ukraine, but it's not just about you all and the stick. So what's the plan and the strategy?
Yep, Congresswoman, I fully agree with you that this needs to be a whole government approach. And I think as Beijing is looking at the crisis in Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine, it's important that they're seeing the kinds of economic measures that the United States is taking and the degree to which our diplomatic and economic and military actions are being done in concert with such a large group of countries from around the world. So I fully agree that there are the full
but we're going to see it. We're going to see the strategy, and it's going to lay it out, and it's going to be. I mean, we had a whole strategy around the Soviet Union, right? Containment was our whole of government strategy, and the Defense Department was part of it, but it wasn't the only part. I'm looking for that equivalent strategy on China. The country is looking for that equivalent strategy on China. I represent auto workers that have been laid off for the better part of the last year because of a 14-cent microchip that they can't get. So when are we going to see the global strategy that we're going to understand, simple, about what our plan is vis-a-vis China?
So my hope, Congressman Slotkin, is that the national security strategy will be out before too long. That's obviously not something that the Defense Department can control. And the national defense strategy as well will provide both a public and a classified version of how we're getting after this particular challenge.
Okay.
There are other efforts underway along the lines of what you're describing that are currently classified, and we can speak about in a different setting.
Okay, yeah, I would just say that the public strategy, the public needs to understand this issue, right? They're watching what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, and wondering when's the next shoe going to drop with China, and are we prepared? To that end, you know, we know that cyber attacks, attacks on our infrastructure, that those kinds of sort of short of traditional conventional war steps are things that we just have to assume the Chinese are thinking about if we get into conflict. And the average American has been on the receiving end of some kind of ransomware attack, cyber attack, and they don't understand what the government is doing to protect them. I know that's largely Homeland Security, but can you talk about cyber threats from China and what we are doing in an unclassified setting, I know, to show the American people that we're protecting them when they're on the front lines?
Thanks, Congresswoman. So that responsibility, as it applies to DOD, is in Cybercom Commander General Nakasone, and he's a great partner that we coordinate with all the time. So for the DOD critical infrastructure, right, he's taking steps, and he's got teams every day watching the defense of the global information grid and to ensure militarily. And as you articulated, the civilian aspect of that is done via Homeland Security.
Right. So I would offer, because I understand that's not your mission, right? But it is going to be part of warfare. It is already part of warfare. And we're the Defense Department here. We're the Armed Services Committee. So I would offer, I would love to see a briefing on this, classified or unclassified, with the Department of Homeland Security sitting right next to you all. Probably wouldn't hurt to get the State Department in there, but something that shows the American people that while we know we're the best fighting force in the world and we're going to kick some butt abroad, we're also coordinated when it comes to protecting back home. Just a gratuitous comment, but with that, I yield back.